Someone literally took a chainsaw to my fancia in broad daylight. I had just come home, looking forward to relaxing by the lake with my dog, only to find that my $3,000 cedar fence had been shredded into scrapwood and scattered across the yard like storm debris. The security cameras captured it all, my neighbor calmly slicing through each post as if she was trimming hedges. When I confronted her, expecting at least a hint of denial or remorse, she stared me down and told me she was fully within her rights to demolish my fence to gain access to the lake. The nerve was astonishing, but she had no clue who she was dealing with. What I did after that turned her life upside down. And drama-nest viewers, let us know where you're tuning in from, because this neighbor feud is about to make waves far beyond my lakeside town. It started out like any other peaceful evening. I'd just pulled into the driveway of my lakeside cabin when Max, my golden retriever, started barking like he'd spotted something out of a horror movie. This wasn't his usual, "You're home" bark. This was pure alarm. Max sprinted toward the back of the property, and I followed, expecting maybe an animal or a fallen branch. What I actually found made my heart slam into overdrive. My beautiful cedar fancia, the one I had poured money and effort into just months ago, was in ruins. This wasn't minor damage. This was total annihilation. Someone had taken a chainsaw and sliced through every single post and beam with disturbingly precise cuts. The ruined planks lay scattered like pieces from a modern art exhibit gone wrong. Sawdust was still fresh, and the scent of freshly cut wood lingered in the air. Max was pacing and whining, sniffing the remains like he couldn't believe it either. I just stood there, stunned, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of stress hallucination from too many sleepless startup nights? The reality hit like a freight train. I had security cameras. I raced inside and pulled up the footage, and there she was, Helen Davidson, my 52-year-old neighbor, revving up a gas-powered chainsaw like she was prepping for a film role. She wasn't hiding, she wasn't rushing. She moved with calm purpose, even checking her watch between cuts like she was on some kind of schedule. She was decked out in gloves, goggles, and even brought a little cooler with drinks. This wasn't a spontaneous fit of rage. This was a planned operation. I grabbed my phone and stormed straight to Helen's front door. Max followed beside me, the world's fluffiest security escort. When she opened the door, she gave me a smile so fake it could have been on a billboard. "Oh, Christopher, what a surprise. What brings you by this lovely evening?" she chirped as if she hadn't just chainsawed my fence into firewood. I held up the phone. "Helen, you destroyed my fence. I have the whole thing on camera." She didn't flinch. Her smile just widened. "Oh, that old fence? It was in the way of the natural lake path. Looked like a boundary issue to me." "You know how those go." I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "A boundary issue? You cut down my fence with a chainsaw?" She gave me a smug little head tilt and said, "Sweetheart, I'm a retired attorney. I've handled property disputes for over 30 years. That fence was likely over shared access land. It's a common legal misunderstanding." The arrogance was unbelievable. She was actually suggesting this was some sort of legal gray area. I was seething, but I held it together. "Helen, this isn't a gray area. It's destruction of private property. I'm calling the police." About 20 minutes later, Officer Martinez arrived. He took one look at the pile of wood that used to be my fence and began jotting down notes. I showed him the footage and explained what had happened, expecting him to either issue a citation or slap some handcuffs on her. But instead, he closed his notepad and gave me a look that practically screamed bad news. "Sir, I get your frustration, but this seems like a civil issue over property boundaries. Without clear proof of criminal intent, this doesn't qualify for criminal charges. You'll need to resolve it in civil court or through county mediation." I was stunned. "Officer, I have video of her using a chainsaw to destroy my fence in broad daylight. How is that not a crime?" He shrugged with a sympathetic tone. "Property lines fall under civil jurisdiction. Best move is to get a professional survey done and take it from there." "So, let me get this straight. If someone cuts through your property with a chainsaw in broad daylight and you have video proof, it's still just a civil disagreement?" "Apparently, that's how the system works." I sat on my back deck afterward. Max curled beside me, both of us watching the sun dip behind the lake. Where my fence used to stand, There was now just splintered wood and silence. I felt helpless. "They're not going to help us, Max," I muttered. "She destroyed our fence, and the system just let her walk." Max looked up at me and licked my hand gently, like he could feel how defeated I was. But in that moment, something in me shifted. If the system wouldn't back me up through official channels, I'd have to take another route. I wasn't going to let Helen Davidson walk all over me like she'd probably done to others. That night, I didn't sleep. All I could think about was Helen's smug attitude. How confidently she dismissed me, like I was just another clueless neighbor she could bulldoze. And that's when I realized, I had to beat her at her own game, strategically, creatively. I'd seen this kind of arrogance before and I wasn't about to be another victim. So I did what any tech-savvy millennial would do. I hit the internet hard. I started digging up anything I could on Helen Davidson, old addresses, property complaints, legal filings, anything that might shed light on who I was up against. What I found on a property dispute forum chilled me to the core. There were posts from different cities, describing the exact same nightmare. A combative woman demanding lake or beach access. A retired attorney leveraging her legal knowledge to pressure neighbors. A pattern of bullying, manipulation, and property encroachment. It was the same story, just with different victims in Miami, Denver, and Phoenix. She had done this before. Not once, not twice, multiple times. This wasn't a neighbor having a bad day. This was someone who had turned legal intimidation into an art form. Helen Davidson wasn't just entitled, she was strategic. She was experienced. And worse, she was deliberate. I spent hours reading first-hand accounts from people she'd harassed, and it painted a horrifying picture. She'd study her neighbors, figure out their pressure points, then corner them legally until they either gave in or gave up. She was like a predator targeting the vulnerable, sinking her teeth in until they surrendered just to escape the stress. One post from Miami stood out, so I reached out to the person behind it. When I got a call back, the woman on the other end is Sarah Mitchell. Tensed the second I said Helen's name. "Oh no, a broken bar. She's still doing this? Where is she now?" That reaction told me everything. Sarah went on to explain that Helen hadn't just pushed for lake access, she had done her homework. She found out I was recently widowed, struggling with medical debt. She preyed on that, Sarah said quietly. When Sarah refused to let Helen carve a path through her property, things escalated fast. Helen filed multiple code violations, phoned in noise complaints when Sarah had company, and even persuaded neighbors to side against her over a so-called community access issue that didn't legally exist. "She ruined my life for 6 months," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "She told people I was selfish, blocking families from the beach. I finally gave in. I let her build a walkway through my garden just so it would stop. Then I sold the house and left." Sarah had been forced out of her dream home, completely broken down by Helen's psychological warfare. "I honestly thought I was losing my mind," she admitted. "Thank you for calling. You have no idea how much it means to hear someone else going through the same thing." She's calculated, manipulative via broken bar, and she doesn't stop. By the time I ended the call, I understood this wasn't just a neighbor dispute. This was a mind game, one played by someone with decades of legal training and zero conscience. I kept digging. Then, I stumbled on something that turned everything upside down. Public tax records showed that Helen was $12,000 behind on her property taxes. The county had already sent final warnings. Her home was officially scheduled for a tax lien sale only weeks away. The mighty Helen Davidson, a former lawyer, self-proclaimed expert on property rights, was on the verge of losing her house. That's when the puzzle finally came together. This wasn't just entitlement. This was desperation. She wasn't just pushing for lake access out of principle, she needed it. Her house had been overmarketed, overbought, and now she was drowning. The aggression, the threats, the chainsaw, it was survival mode. I started looking back even further. Property records revealed she had bought a lakeside house 3 years earlier for $420,000, which was significantly higher than similar listings in the area. And the way she purchased it, no inspection, paid in full, closed in record time. The real estate listing had hyped it up hard. Exclusive lakefront access, retirement dream, wake up to crystal waters every morning. It was clear, She'd been sold a fantasy and she bought in completely. But then I found a more recent listing. Helen had tried to sell the property just 2 months ago, quietly. No fanfare. But the listing was yanked after a few weeks, and not a single serious buyer had emerged. It all made sense now. Helen wasn't acting out of some twisted sense of legal superiority. She was cornered. She had gambled everything on a lakeside dream, and now that dream was crumbling. The chainsaw wasn't a flex, it was a last-ditch move. The agent notes I came across in a real estate discussion thread were brutally honest. Potential buyers were constantly raising red flags about the lack of lake access. One note even said the property was valued 15% below similar lakefront homes because of these restrictions. Another read: seller is completely unrealistic about pricing considering the access issue. Helen had bought her house expecting it would appreciate past $500,000 thanks to the promised lake access. In reality, without that access, it might fetch $280,000 if she was lucky. That meant she lost over $140,000 in anticipated value. Worse still, she dipped into her retirement savings to fund the purchase. She was in deep financial trouble, drowning, really. And suddenly, her actions made perfect sense. The destruction of my fence wasn't some impulsive act, it was a strategic move. Helen was trying to fabricate lake access by creating a visual path through my land. That illusion could bump up her property value just enough to land a buyer. If someone toured the house and saw what looked like an established trail to the water, they might not question the legalities. In essence, she was attempting fraud, but one cloaked in legal gray areas that she thought she could manipulate just long enough to close a deal. The chainsaw wasn't just a tool, it was her last resort. She was counting on me to feel intimidated, banking on her background as a lawyer to scare me into silence. But the more I uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Over the past few weeks, she had left snide little notes on neighbors' windshields about community unity and shared resources. She'd called the city inspectorate twice accusing my fence of violating setback ordinances. Both complaints were tossed out. She even posted rants in the neighborhood association's online forum about selfish residents' hoarding nature and how everyone should do their part to support fair lake access. Every one of those moves was part of a carefully constructed narrative. She was setting the stage, trying to build a story that made her intrusion seem reasonable, even noble. Helen was playing a calculated game, and most of the neighborhood had no idea they were just pawns. But she'd made one massive miscalculation. She underestimated me. That evening, I sat on the back deck with Max beside me, watching the lake Helen so desperately wanted access to. And I realized I had a decision to make. I could file a civil suit, go through months of legal headaches, spend a fortune fighting someone who had nothing left to lose a broken bar only to maybe win a judgment I'd never collect. Or I could start thinking like Helen, strategically, creatively. That tax sale date opened up a whole new path. If she lost the house, the harassment would stop permanently, and all I had to do broken bar was make sure she didn't find a way to come up with $12,000 in time. But then, while combing through more property records, I uncovered something that made Helen's situation look even worse than I thought. The kind of revelation that flipped the entire game upside down. Think you can guess what Anna Dromanes discovered in those files? Drop your theories below. The next day, I decided to get fully educated on how county tax sales worked. If I was going to engage, I needed to know exactly what I was walking into. Surprisingly, the process was simple. If a homeowner fails to pay their property taxes, the county can auction off the home to the highest bidder. The winning buyer must pay in full, in cash, and the sale is final. No take-backs. Helen had just weeks before that hammer came down, but the deeper I went, the clearer it became her tax debt was only part of a bigger financial storm. She had quietly listed her home for sale 2 months prior but yanked the listing after failing to attract even a single serious buyer. Through a real estate professional forum, I found internal agent notes that confirmed the worst. Seller believed lake access was included. Multiple inspections confirmed it is not. Property value significantly impacted. Comparable lakefront homes with verified access are selling for $100,000 more. Recommend a major price adjustment or legal resolution of access issue before relisting. Helen had been clinging to a fantasy. And reality? It was about to crush her. Then came the twist that changed everything. I cross-referenced Helen's purchase records with the original subdivision plans from 2 decades ago. Back in the 1990s, the land had been part of a large lakefront development, which was later split into private parcels. Those original plans showed a communal lake access point that was intended to serve the neighborhood, but as the land got subdivided, that shared area was eventually deeded over entirely to my property. Helen had bought her house under the mistaken belief that she had rights to an access path that no longer existed. She was scammed, and now, she was trying to pass that scam on to someone else. But what I found next was just plain tragic. Mortgage filings revealed Helen had refinanced her last home, liquidated her 401k, and taken out personal loans just to buy this lakeside property. She had poured every last cent she had into this place, a broken bar. Helen had poured her retirement savings into what she believed was the perfect lakefront sanctuary. But by the time she discovered the truth about the lake access, it was far too late to back out. She was locked in financially. Turns out, the real estate agent who sold her the property had used outdated marketing materials from the original development, materials that didn't reflect the current, subdivided property lines. In short, Helen had been misled, but instead of taking legal action against the agent who deceived her, she made it everyone else's problem, mine included. And here's the wild part. I actually started feeling a bit of sympathy for her. She'd been conned by a slick agent, lost her life savings, and was watching her golden years dissolve into chaos. But then I'd think about the pile of cedar scraps where my fence used to be, and that sympathy would vanish. Being a victim doesn't give you permission to victimize others. Helen's desperation was growing by the day. Her behavior was spiraling bolder, more erratic. She began leaving handwritten notes on my windshield with messages like, "Community cooperation makes neighborhoods stronger and shared spaces benefit all." She reported my property 3 times in 1 week to the city inspector, citing supposed violations. Each time, the complaints were investigated and thrown out. And then things got just plain weird. She started letting her aging Cocker Spaniel relieve itself on my front lawn right in full view of my security cameras. She stared directly at them, like she was daring me to say something. When I did finally confront her, she waved it off with a smug smile and said, "Well, that area's disputed land anyway. Seems fair my dog can use it." But the final straw came when Helen took her game to the neighborhood association's online forum. She began posting about selfish property owners and the need for reasonable community access to the lake. No names were mentioned, but the message was crystal clear. She was painting me as the villain. I was the greedy tech guy hoarding lakefront paradise from a poor retiree. She was playing her part perfectly, the helpless older woman, scammed out of her dream, just asking for fairness. And some of the neighbors, they were starting to buy it. But while Helen was weaving her narrative, I was quietly crafting a plan of my own. If she was going to lose her house anyway in the upcoming tax sale, maybe it was time to help speed that process along legally. County tax auctions are public events. Anyone can bid, and whoever offers the most pays cash upfront gets the deed. It's simple, clean, and final. No endless legal tug-of-war, no appeals. And if I won the auction, I would own the very house from which she was trying to force her way to the lake. The irony would be delicious. That weekend, I drove by her property. What I saw confirmed just how badly things were unraveling. The once pristine flower beds were overtaken by weeds. Her lawn hadn't been mowed in weeks. Through the window, I spotted a stack of unopened mail gathering dust on the entryway table. These weren't just signs of someone falling behind on chores. They were symptoms of a life crumbling under pressure. Helen was pouring all her time, energy, and sanity into fighting me because she literally couldn't afford to focus on anything else. Her future depended on convincing someone, anyone, that the house had lake access. It was the only way out of her financial mess. As I sat in my car, watching the slow decay of her once pristine property, it hit me. I was witnessing the collapse of someone's American dream. She had worked for decades, saved diligently, then put everything she had into a home she thought would be her peaceful escape. Instead, she bought into a lie. And now she was drowning. Part of me pitied her, but then I'd remember the footage of Helen, calm and collected, slicing my fence apart post by post. She hadn't stumbled into desperation, she chose to drag me down with her, and that choice was about to backfire, because what I found in Helen's real estate history made everything make sense. And it revealed why she wielded a chainsaw with such misplaced confidence. Got a theory? Drop your wildest guesses in the comments because what Anna Dramanest uncovered next will blow your mind. The next morning, I dove deeper into how tax auctions worked, compared to the legal mess Helen had been threatening me with. The process was refreshingly simple. To be eligible to bid, I needed to register as a qualified buyer and show proof of funds, either in cash or a certified check. The county had assessed Helen's home at $300,000, so I had to be ready to pay in full if I won. I contacted my bank and arranged for a certified check. Quietly, privately, I didn't tell a soul, because if Helen found out what I was planning, there was no telling what kind of legal chaos she'd try to unleash to stop me. Meanwhile, her harassment reached new levels of pettiness. She made a point of walking her dog past my property every single day. Every morning, like clockwork at 7 a.m., Helen walked her dog right along my property line, allowing him to relieve himself on every tree, shrub, and mailbox post. All the while, she stared straight at my windows with an unsettling intensity. When I upgraded my security cameras to keep better records of her actions, Helen upped the ante. She began carrying a notebook during her walks, jotting down license plates of my visitors and snapping photos of delivery vans and maintenance crews that stopped by. It was obvious as she was assembling some kind of dossier, likely to accuse me of running a commercial operation out of my home and violating residential zoning laws. The moment that pushed me over the edge happened early one morning when I looked out my window and saw Helen standing in my driveway with the clipboard and measuring tape. She was literally measuring the distance from my fence to the lake, snapping photos, and scribbling notes. When I confronted her, she didn't deny anything. In fact, she stood there confidently and declared, "I'm documenting the unreasonable obstruction of community access to the lake. This will be crucial evidence when I present my case to the county zoning board." I was floored. Here she was, trespassing on my property without permission, collecting evidence for a legal claim that only existed in her imagination. Later that evening, Helen did something that revealed just how desperate she truly was. She came to my front door. When I opened it, she looked like a completely different persona. Eyes red, her voice trembling. Gone was the assertive former attorney. In her place was someone who looked emotionally exhausted and cornered. "Christopher, please," she said softly. "I'm begging you. I'll lose everything in 2 weeks. Just give me a small easement of 3 feet wide to get to the lake. I'll pay for the survey. I have $5,000 in cash. It's yours if you just sign the agreement." She clutched a manila envelope, presumably holding the money, and looked at me with pleading eyes. I stood there, thinking of everything she had done, sawing down my fence, constantly harassing me, trying to turn the neighborhood against me, and for a brief second, I felt something unexpected, pity. But then I remembered the footage of her coldly cutting through my fence posts like she was performing a routine task. That sympathy gone. I felt this strange mix of empathy and rage. A part of me wanted to just say yes and end this once and for all. But then I remembered Sarah and Miami and everyone else Helen had likely trampled to get what she wanted. "Helen," I said, "you destroyed my property, harassed me and my neighbors, made bogus reports to the city, and now you want help. Maybe if you'd started with a polite request instead of a chainsaw, we wouldn't be here." She wiped her eyes, paused, and then switched tactics instantly. That sharp legal mind of hers was still very much intact. "I'm a 52-year-old woman on the verge of losing her home," she said. "Do you really want to be the young tech guy who ruined an older woman's life? What do you think the neighbors will say when they find out?" There it was, the manipulation Sarah had warned me about. Even in her most vulnerable state, Helen was trying to twist the narrative, guilt-tripping me, using social pressure to corner me. I recognized the tactic immediately. I'd read enough Anna Dramanest testimonials to spot it. Helen had a pattern: find a person's soft spot and press until they caved. She assumed I'd care what the neighbors thought, but what she didn't know was that I had already spoken to many of them, and most had their own horror stories involving Helen. There were complaints of noise, demands for shared access to private spaces, even legal threats over things that weren't even real violations. Helen had been making enemies since she unpacked her moving boxes. The following day, she made an announcement that caught me completely off guard. She'd found someone to help her financially, a supposed investor who would front the money to save her home from auction. "My brother-in-law is stepping in to help," she said loudly to the mail carrier, just loud enough for me to overhear from inside. "We'll be bidding at the auction and securing proper lake access once and for all." She was back to being smug and cocky, parading around her yard like she'd already won. But something about her declaration didn't sit right with me. If Helen had family with enough cash to bail her out of a $12,000 tax bill, why had no one stepped in sooner? That weekend, I dug into her family background, and what I found made a lot of things click. Her brother-in-law, Michael Davidson, was indeed a successful contractor with serious financial clout, but property records revealed that he had already loaned Helen $15,000 a couple of years ago, secured by a lien on her house. Digging deeper, I uncovered a small claims case involving another family member who had lent her money and been stiffed. It wasn't a one-time thing. Helen had a track record of borrowing from relatives and not paying them back. Sure, her brother-in-law might step in again, but if he did, it would likely be under strict conditions. He'd want control over the bidding, maybe even the property itself, to make sure he wasn't throwing good money after bad. As the auction date drew closer, I realized this wasn't going to be the simple, clean solution I had envisioned. If her brother-in-law was involved, I could end up in a bidding war against someone far more financially equipped than Helen ever was. Still, I had learned something crucial. Even if Helen managed to keep the house, her problems were far from over. That much stress, that much history of financial scrambling, her situation wasn't going to magically stabilize. Even if Helen managed to keep the house, she'd still be drowning in mortgage debt, still unable to keep up with the very property taxes that had caused all this in the first place, and still clinging to the dream of boosting her home's value by securing access to the lake. Rescuing her from foreclosure wouldn't fix the root of the issue. It would only delay the inevitable and give her more time to make my life unbearable. I chose to participate in the auction, but then Helen declared she'd found someone willing to loan her the money. The real mystery was, who in their right mind would back her after everything she'd done? Who do you think agreed to help her? The Anadramanest audience always has some sharp predictions, so let's hear them. When auction day came, the setting was perfect, one of those crisp, lakefront mornings that usually makes you feel lucky to live nearby, but I was too keyed up to enjoy it. The steps outside the county courthouse were already busy with activity. I counted at least 15 possible bidders, a mix of seasoned house flippers with their clipboards, sharply dressed real estate investors eyeing opportunities, and a handful of locals who looked like they were hoping to score a bargain. I took a position near the back, keeping a low profile while watching for Helen and her supposed financial backer. Sure enough, she showed up in a silver sedan driven by a man in his early 60s who looked visibly uneasy. I assumed this was her brother-in-law, Michael Davidson. He fit the part of a successful contractor: work boots, well-pressed jeans, and a company-branded polo shirt. But his demeanor said it all. He kept glancing at his phone, scanning the crowd anxiously, and exchanging what looked like increasingly tense words with Helen. Helen, by contrast, looked more composed than I'd seen her in weeks. She came dressed like she was heading into a boardroom, wearing a navy blazer and a string of pearls, completely unfazed by the fact that she was on the brink of losing her home. The auctioneer wasted no time. He began by reading the formal property description and outlining the sale terms. The opening bid was a mere $50,000, shockingly low for a lakeside property. But that's how tax auctions work. They start at a minimum and let the competition drive the real price. The numbers rose quickly. Within minutes, the bidding passed $120,000 as serious contenders entered the fray. Michael Davidson joined at $130,000, placing his bids with the calm precision of someone who'd done this before. I stayed quiet until the amount reached $150,000. Then I made my move. Helen's head snapped around the moment she heard my voice. Her eyes darted through the crowd until she locked onto me. The tension skyrocketed. From that point, The psychological battle began. Helen urgently whispered to her brother-in-law while gesturing in my direction, her movements frantic. Then, in a surprising move, she broke from the crowd and walked straight over to where I was standing, ignoring every unspoken rule of auction etiquette. "Christopher, why are you even here?" she said loudly enough for others to hear. "You don't need the property." I kept my tone calm, my expression unreadable. "It's a public auction, Helen. Anyone with the funds is allowed to participate." She leaned in, her voice dropping into a sharp whisper laced with venom. "If you take my home from me, I swear I will make your life hell. You have no idea what I'm capable of when I'm cornered." Meanwhile, the bidding marched on $160,000, then $165,000, and then $170,000. Michael was beginning to show signs of strain. He kept checking his phone and engaging in hushed arguments with Helen between bids. Then, I saw-eyed at the exact moment when he reached his breaking point. His shoulders dropped slightly, and he gave Helen a defeated shake of his head. It was the body language of someone who just delivered unwelcome news. When the auctioneer asked for $175,000, Michael hesitated before slowly raising his hand. I didn't wait long. I immediately countered with $180,000. A heavy silence followed. Helen looked stunned, as if watching her entire world collapse in front of her. She clung to Michael's arm, whispering furiously, growing louder with each plea. "Please, Michael, you said you'd help me. I can't lose everything now. There must be something else we can do." But Michael was already showing her something on his phone, probably a bank balance or loan limit. He shook his head, resigned. "I'm sorry, Helen," I overheard him say. "I've gone further than I should have already." 15 strangers watched the scene unfold, Helen's desperation laid bare for everyone to witness. The moment was raw, and she knew it. The auctioneer asked for any higher bids. Silence. From across the space, I could actually hear Helen's panicked breathing. Then I raised my hand one more time. $185,000, I said firmly. The auctioneer paused for just a moment before bringing down the gavel with finality. It echoed like a verdict from a courtroom judge. Going twice. Sold to bidder number 47, Christopher Martinez, for $185,000. The crisp smack of the gavel hitting the podium was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in a long time. Helen's expression was everything I'd anticipated and then some. Her face cycled through a series of emotions that would have been funny if they weren't so tragic. Confusion as she registered the auctioneer's words, shock when she heard my name, horror as she realized what had just happened, and finally, raw fury as it all sank in. "This can't be happening. That's my house. You can't do this to me," she cried, her voice cracking as tears began to stream down her cheeks. A pair of security officers began moving in as her volume escalated, but Michael managed to get a grip on her, gently steering her away before things got more dramatic. I approached the two of them while they were still trying to come to terms with the outcome. Despite the adrenaline pulsing through me, I kept my voice even and composed. "Helen, according to the county's law, you'll have 30 days to leave the premises," I said. "That said, I'm not heartless. If you're open to having a civil conversation, I'm willing to discuss alternatives." Helen looked up at me, mascara smeared across her face, her carefully constructed image shattered completely. Her voice was brittle. "Alternatives? What possible options could you be offering me after what you just pulled?" Before I could respond, Michael extended his hand in a surprisingly polite gesture. "Mr. Martinez, I appreciate your willingness to talk. Helen's family, and we'd prefer to resolve this in a respectful way." The crowd was beginning to break apart, though I noticed a few onlookers still hanging around to witness the unfolding drama. Small towns thrive on gossip, and I had no doubt this story would be all over the neighborhood by the end of the day. Helen had spent weeks trying to paint me as the unreasonable neighbor, but now, it was obvious to everyone that she'd been facing foreclosure and had responded by lashing out and damaging someone else's property. The truth had finally come to light, and it was clear who had really been in the wrong. Her narrative had crumbled, while mine had never looked stronger. "We'll talk tomorrow, when things have settled," I told her gently. "Right now, I think you need some space to process this." Walking back to my car, auction documents in hand, I felt a strange cocktail of emotions. There was satisfaction. Sure, yeah, this was a clean strategic win. Helen's months of harassment had come full circle, and now I legally owned the property she had tried so hard to exploit. But there was also an unexpected pang of sympathy. Watching someone lose their home, even someone who had gone out of their way to make my life difficult, it didn't bring me the joy I thought it would. Helen had made a mess of things, yes, but she was still a person caught in a crisis. What came next would depend entirely on how tomorrow's conversation went. Would I become her downfall or her unlikely lifeline? But the choice I had in mind wasn't something any, least of all Helen, could have predicted. What do you think I'll do next? Show compassion? Or deliver the final blow? Let me know in the comments, and Drama Nest always has the most interesting takes. The next morning, I knocked on Helen's front door right on time, holding a manila folder filled with legal documents that would shape both of our futures. When she opened the door, it was clear the night hadn't been kind to her. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes red and swollen, and she was still wearing the same outfit from the auction. Gone was the poised, retired attorney who had launched a campaign of harassment against me. In her place stood a woman who looked like she'd been crying non-stop. "Christopher," she murmured, her voice strained from exhaustion, "I assume you're here about the eviction." I lifted the folder slightly and gave her a calm smile. "Actually, Helen, that's not why I'm here. Can we talk?" She stepped aside, and I entered the living room, a space that mirrored the chaos in her life. Half-packed boxes were scattered around, financial paperwork covered the coffee table, and used tissues lay crumpled on nearly every surface. She motioned for me to sit, though she remained standing, unable to settle her nerves. "I've done a lot of thinking about our situation," I began, "and I have a proposal that might surprise you. I'm willing to offer you a leasy $1,200 per month rent, and I'll waive the first month to give you time to stabilize things." Helen stared at me like I'd just spoken another language. "Why a broken bar? Why would you even consider helping me after everything I did? After I destroyed your fence and made your life miserable?" Her words hung in the room, heavy and raw. I paused before answering, making sure my response was measured and sincere. "Because throwing someone out onto the street doesn't help anyone. It just leads to more chaos. I know you made bad decisions when you felt like you had no way out, but I understand what desperation does to a person." I opened the folder and pulled out the lease agreement, professionally prepared by a real estate attorney. "But there are rules, Helen," I said firmly, "non-negotiable ones. No access through my property ever." "That's non-negotiable," I explained firmly. "Second, you'll be responsible for keeping the house and yard in their current condition. Third, absolutely no harassment of neighbors or interference with my property. And finally, any violation of these terms will result in immediate eviction. No warnings, no second chances." Helen studied the lease agreement with the sharp eye of someone who had spent 3 decades analyzing legal contracts. I could practically see her legal instincts battling her current desperation. Strangely, it struck me that Thesa sitting across from Helen, discussing terms, might have been the first real, honest conversation we'd ever had. No threats, no games, just two people trying to find a way forward. It felt almost normal. "This is more generous than I expected," Helen admitted, her voice low, "but it's also incredibly humiliating. I went from owning this place to renting it from you overnight." I leaned forward, balancing empathy with resolve. "Helen, you went from being on the verge of homelessness to having a stable place to live. The choice is yours, but I need a decision today. I have other options for this property if you're not interested." She looked around the room at the half-packed boxes, the scattered papers, the remnants of a life she thought she had more time to sort through. It was clear she was weighing her dwindling options. With her credit in shambles and barely any savings, renting another home, especially at this price in a lakeside area, would be nearly impossible. "What about the lake access?" she asked softly. "That was the reason I bought this house to begin with. The broken bar, the reason everything fell apart." I'd expected that question and prepared a firm, fair answer. "You never had legal lake access, Helen, and you know that." The realtor misrepresented the situation, and that's unfortunate, but it doesn't give you the right to cut through my land. "If you want lake access, There's a public boat launch just a couple of miles away, or you could apply for a country club membership. But you're not getting to the water through my property. That's final. Later that weekend, the neighborhood held its regular barbecue, an event that couldn't have come at a better time. It was the first test of how this new arrangement between Helen and me would play out in public. Helen showed up, reluctantly, keeping to the sidelines while I mingled with neighbors, most of whom were clearly curious about the abrupt shift in our relationship. Eventually, someone decided to just say what everyone else was thinking. "Helen, we heard Christopher bought your house at the tax auction. That must have been a broken bar, a surprise," one neighbor said, trying to sound casual but obviously fishing for details. Helen took a breath and, to my surprise, chose honesty over pride. "Actually, he's renting it back to me. I was wrong about the fence and the lake access. I acted out of fear. I thought I was going to lose everything, and I lashed out at him." Another neighbor, who had clearly been on the receiving end of Helen's past behavior, couldn't help but comment, "Funny, you were so sure you had the right to use that path to the lake. You said nothing would stop you." Instead of snapping back or getting defensive, Helen did something none of us expected. She owned it. "I was wrong, and I'm truly sorry. I was in a terrible place, financially and emotionally. Christopher could have left me to lose it all, but he gave me a chance to stay. I don't deserve his kindness, but I'm incredibly thankful for it." Her words were quiet, sincere, and they shifted something in the air. I could tell the neighbors were rethinking their judgments about both of us. Later that evening, long after the barbecue had ended and the yards had grown quiet, Helen knocked on my door. She was holding a bottle of wine and a folded piece of paper. "I wanted to properly thank you," she said, handing me both. "I spent the last 2 years blaming everyone else for my problems, the realtor, the previous owners, even my own family for not stepping in sooner. And you, a broken bar. I hated you for standing in my way. But yesterday, you could have completely destroyed me. Instead, you offered me something I didn't expect, dignity." She paused, clearly emotional. "I don't understand why you chose grace over payback, a broken bar, but I won't forget it." I took the bottle and gestured for her to join me on the deck. As we sat watching the sunset over the lake that had sparked so much conflict between us, I realized something unexpected. Buying Helen's house hadn't just ended the feud, it had opened the door to something better. She was learning to face hardship without lashing out. And I was learning that sometimes the best victories aren't about domination, they're about resolution. The woman who once came at my fence with a chainsaw was now someone I could genuinely respect. And that growth, that transformation, it meant more than any revenge I could have served up. But don't get too comfortable. This story still has one final twist, one that will shift how you've seen everything so far, because something tells me a drama nest isn't quite done yet. What kind of final revelation could possibly outshine everything that had already happened? Let me tell you, 3 months after the auction, I got a phone call that shifted my entire perspective. It was Sarah Michela, the woman from Miami who had first helped me recognize Helen's behavioral pattern. "Christopher," she said, excitement in her voice, "you won't believe this. Helen called me last week to apologize." "Seriously?" "Like a real apology, not some performative, lawyer-scripted one?" "Yes," she replied. She was different, honestly remorseful, calm. She even offered to pay for the damage she did to my garden when she tried to bulldoze her way through my property. It was unbelievable. Sarah was clearly stunned. In 30 years of dealing with difficult personalities, I've never seen a transformation like this. "You didn't just stop her behavior, you helped her change as a person." Helen's transformation over those 3 months had indeed been something to see. The hostile, entitled neighbor who once threatened lawsuits and damaged property was now someone adding real value to the community. She'd organized a local cleanup event, volunteered to help elderly neighbors with yard work, and even used her legal background to peacefully mediate a small property dispute between 2 other homeowners. This wasn't surface-level courtesy. This was a genuine change in how she approached people and problems. She no longer saw every disagreement as a battle to be won with threats. She'd learned how to compromise and how to collaborate. The shift in our neighborhood was remarkable. Watching how Helen and I resolved our high-stakes conflict inspired others to rethink how they handled disputes. Soon after, The homeowners association even introduced a new system for resolving issues, one based on conversation and mutual understanding instead of legal threats. Arguments that once would have dragged on for years were now getting resolved over coffee and calm discussions. Helen had gone from being a warning story to becoming a real-life example of second chances done right. But the most eye-opening part of this story came when I finally understood why Helen's brother-in-law, Michael, had seemed so indifferent at the auction. A week after the sale, Michael Davidson reached out to me directly. "Mr. Martinez, I thought you deserved to know where our family stood," he began. "Helen's been borrowing from family for years, always promising some big property return that never materialized. It's been exhausting. Her patterns, the drama, the manipulation. What you did offering her a reasonable rental instead of going for revenge was the first time someone addressed the problem without enabling it. I hadn't realized just how deep the damage went. Helen's aggressive behavior toward neighbors hadn't just caused issues on our street, it had also frayed her relationships with her own family." Michael admitted they were relieved someone else had stepped in. "We care about her," he said, "but at a certain point, helping her just meant encouraging more self-sabotage. You gave her a way to move forward that didn't reward her bad behavior. That auction hadn't just rescued her from losing her home, it had also prevented even deeper cracks in her family ties." Under the rental setup, Helen's life took a turn for the better in more ways than one. Without the crushing weight of mortgage payments, back taxes, and constant home repair costs, she was finally able to live comfortably within her means. The desperation that had once consumed her fueling the chaos was gone. In its place was peace, stability, and the version of Helen that, I suspect, had existed long before the financial collapse changed her. She even began substitute teaching at the local high school, using her legal training to help students understand civic issues in a way they could actually relate to. 6 months after the auction, Helen knocked on my door again, this time with a different kind of proposal. "Christopher," she said, "I know my lease still has 6 months left, but I wanted to ask if you'd consider letting me stay long-term. I really like this arrangement. It's worked well for both of us. I never truly appreciated this home until I stopped worrying about losing it every single day." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Helen was now happier as a renter than she ever was as an overwhelmed homeowner. The constant stress and pressure that made her combative and bitter had vanished, replaced by the calm that comes with financial stability and a life lived within one's means. As I sit here now, gazing out across the lake that once fueled so much anger and hostility between us, I can't help but reflect on how differently things could have played out. Had I chosen revenge instead of strategy, Helen would be homeless, likely spreading her misery to a new neighborhood, repeating the same cycles. But I didn't, and that changed everything. And yet, something tells me a drama nest might still have one last turn in store. Had I chosen to do nothing at all, Helen might still own that house, but she'd also still be trapped in the same cycle of financial stress that pushed her into destructive choices in the first place. Instead, the path we took addressed the real problem, not just the symptoms. Helen gained stable housing and a genuine opportunity to rebuild her life and reputation. I got what I'd wanted all along: peace, quiet, and a property that pays for itself. These days, the ending of our story plays out in the simplest of moments, like in the evenings, when the sun begins to set. Helen and I often find ourselves outside at the same time, each tending to our own gardens, enjoying the calm view of the lake we now share respectfully. She gives a warm wave, and I return it with a smile. Even Max, who once barked wildly at the very sound of her, now barely lifts his head when she's outside. The fence that kicked off this whole saga? It's been rebuilt, sturdier than ever, and this time, she respects the boundary completely. Sometimes, the most powerful form of revenge is simply giving someone the space to rise above their lowest moment. So there it is. Real revenge isn't always about tearing someone down. Sometimes it's about helping them become something better, someone even they didn't know they could be. Helen learned the hard way that reckless decisions come with real consequences, but she also learned that redemption is possible when someone offers both accountability and a path forward. Here at Anna Drama Nest, we believe every conflict carries the potential to teach, to heal, And to change life even when it starts with someone taking a chainsaw to your fence in broad daylight. The takeaway: stand firm, protect your peace, but don't lose your compassion along the way. If the story of neighborhood chaos turned redemption hit home for you, drop a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Ever managed to turn a rival into a friend? Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next episode, where real-life conflict meets unexpected lessons. What did we actually learn from all this? Maybe nothing, but admit it was a good ride, wasn't it? Don't forget to hit like, and make sure you're subscribed to Anna Drama Nest.